So hi everyone, I'm Anne Jones. I'm delighted to be interviewing Doug Wanstall today from Beyond Zero. I've worked with Doug and the guys for a little while, and they're doing some incredible things in terms of mitigating carbon emissions, particularly from an agricultural perspective. But I'm hoping that we're going to learn a lot today about carbon, and particularly about what carbon zero means and how to move along that journey from a drinks industry perspective. So, Doug, hi, thanks for joining me. Could you give us a quick introduction, maybe to yourself and your background, and also to Beyond Zero and what it is that you're actually trying to achieve?
Of course, yeah, and thank you for inviting me along to this. It's a great pleasure. So, so my name is Doug Wanstall. If anybody ever asks me what I do, I still say I'm a farmer. I still identify as a farmer, and I'm based here on my farm near Ashford in Kent. But for the last 9 years, I've been working basically on climate change mitigation, trying to help people develop ways and systems to reduce their impact on the climate, and even better, not only just to reduce emissions, but to increase carbon removal as well. So Beyond Zero is effectively a project developer where we work with companies and organizations to help them. This is across farms, across vineyards, all sorts of any land-based industry, to help them develop a new way of operating that continually reduces their emissions and continually increases their carbon removal.
Amazing, thank you. And this is a sort of stepping back into a bigger picture question, but why is that so important?
Well, I guess my light bulb moment came in 2015 when I did a sort of took part in an educational sabbatical, and I went to the Paris climate talks, and there was that was the light bulb moment for me. That was really what really sent the message home to me, which should have been blindingly obvious already, that we're in a climate emergency and we all need to do our bit. But secondly, that land management, or rather a change in land management, was going to be key in the reversal of climate change and also the reversal of biodiversity collapse.
I mean, those are both pretty big ambitions to do something about. So what are the main methods, what are the main ways that you go about improving that, particularly when you're thinking about kind of growing grapes or growing grain for spirits?
Gosh, there are just so many ways, and you know, whenever I sort of do tours of the farm, it's meant to be 2 hours. It normally ends up being 3. So to pack this into 15 minutes is going to be quite hard. But essentially, what we're looking at doing is working from the soil up. So the soil is the secret. You know, soils have been depleted, neglected, abused, and we did this as well on my own farm and my own farming system. And we kind of got led down this new agricultural paradigm in the sort of 70s and 80s of thinking that chemistry was going to cure all of our problems and increase yields and reduce disease and all of these things. Well, you know, some of these things were a miracle. You know, talk to my father's generation, and you know, using nitrogen fertilizers, for instance, increased yields exponentially. But what we didn't realize were the problems that were occurring. And what we didn't realize is the loss of all of those traditional skills and that traditional knowledge of how to nurture one's soil was being lost. And it's soil that can drive the reversal of climate change. And what we're really looking to do is increase the soil life. And what we know is that when we get the conditions right for soil life to thrive, it does exactly that. It thrives, it grows, and through the action of everything from the tiniest microbe to the juiciest worm, the action of them eating and being eaten and pooping and decaying is what really turbocharges soil carbon sequestration, i.e. taking carbon from up here where it's doing harm into the soil where it only does good.
Amazing. And I guess that's particularly good for grape growing because you haven't got to plough the soil at all, being a perennial crop. Is that true? Does that therefore see higher carbon levels in viticulture?
I think viticulture has a great opportunity because again, within viticulture, I guess there have been issues because quite often you'll see beautiful, pristine vineyards with tightly mown into row, nothing under the row, and wherever you have bare soil, that's a risk to soil life. And yes, of course, quite often viticulture isn't ploughing and constantly ploughing, but there are still vineyards that are cultivating under the row quite aggressively. And actually, I think we can reverse that trend and start to have living roots in the soil at all times, just between the rows and indeed underneath the rows. But it needs careful management.
It sounds suspiciously like regenerative viticulture. So I'm
It
sure
really does.
I'm sure some of our regenerative proponents will be delighted to hear that. And how about on spirits? In terms of grain and growing grain, what are the main opportunities there?
Yeah, so on our own farm here, so one of the biggest, so on an arable farm where grains are grown, often the largest emission on any grain growing farm is nitrogen fertilizer. And really what we've seen on our own farm, and I'm sitting here in a lab and we do a lot of work with the University of Kent and other research institutions as well. What we've realized is that steady progression towards greater soil health and that buildup of soil life that I mentioned earlier, and that cycling of nutrient means that we can actually use considerably yet less nitrogen fertilizer and still achieve the yields. And what's really cool about starch production that we're looking for in grain for spirits is actually the lower the protein, i.e. the lower the nitrogen in the grain, you generally get a higher yield of starch. And so actually we can grow really good yields of spirit grain with less than half the amount of nitrogen fertilizer that we were. And there are farmers out there, and there are farmers who are well ahead of us, who are using a fraction of that, 20% of what they used to. And that has a significant effect on the overall life cycle emissions of any spirit that's grown with that grain.
That's amazing. How do you actually measure the below ground activity, whether it be insect life or fungi or carbon? What are the physical ways that you measure that?
Well, that's the sort of $50 million question. So we can do some really basic things like digging a hole and seeing how many worms there are, and actually doing a simple worm count in every sod of soil is a really good indicator. And you really want to be able to find in a typical spade, 10 to 15 worms within that spadeful. And if you've got those 10 to 15 worms, you've generally got a pretty healthy soil food web. If you haven't got that many, you need to do some work.
Amazing. So what is it that Beyond Zero does that's different from various other kind of carbon calculators and things?
Yeah, so I think the main thing is we're not just a calculator. What we do is we take a whole land holding approach. So what we've done for many of our clients is we measure three key baselines. One is we make a natural capital baseline. So we use aerial photography to analyze the number of trees, hedgerows, wetlands, ponds, all of these different things, and of course vines, grasses, wildflower strips, all of that sort of thing. And we put that onto a map, and that's on a map that's created to a 1 meter resolution, and that tells us exactly what natural capital the estate has. And from there, we can work out what the current carbon removal is. We then do a soil carbon audit. So we look at how much carbon there is in the soil now, and we do that by measuring. There are all sorts of satellite portals that you can use. We don't think they're accurate enough yet. So we physically go out there and measure the soil carbon. And that becomes the soil carbon baseline. And then we work out what the total emissions are. So this is where the real detail comes in and the nitty gritty. And we've had clients who have literally weighed every spanner, every nut, every bolt in order to get an accurate emissions figure. What we find is what we try and do is to really whip up enthusiasm. And actually we find that firstly measuring emissions is is a good thing to do. But actually, it becomes infectious within an organization when you say to them, right now, guys, we know what we're at, we know what the baseline is. How are we going to take this? How are we going to reduce this by 10%, 20%, 30% over a time horizon? And really what we try and do is establish the data first, and then whip up the organization into an emission cutting frenzy, so that the desire to cut emissions permeates throughout the organization.
Amazing. And I guess there's something also really positive about the fact that you're increasing mitigations through soil organic carbon and things, and it's not just cutting, it's also improving on the other hand. That must feel really energizing.
It really is. And what we find is that there are very few estates, land holdings that don't have opportunities to remove more carbon. They might not have thought about it, but there's always the opportunity to plant another hedge, plant more trees. And as part of the natural capital baseline, we'll measure every metre of hedgerow, and we'll record every tree over a metre tall. And again, that becomes infectious. Okay, so how many more meters of hedge are we going to plant this year? How many more trees can we plant? Where can we strategically put them that doesn't interfere with the vineyard? Because that's critical. We have this conversation all the time. The number one goal for these guys is to maximize the quality and quantity of their vineyard crop. So what we do is we create mitigations and ways to remove carbon that enable them to achieve their goals, but still remove a lot more carbon.
Whilst also increasing biodiversity, of course.
Absolutely, yeah.
What have you got any examples of any sort of great successful carbon reductions or mitigation initiatives? Any great kind of, I don't know, ways that you've come to a production perspective that you can share?
Gosh, okay, so yes, there are a few. So here we're lucky enough to play host to the Pleasant Land Distillery. They're a new distillery. They're only 2 years old, and they're effectively a contract distillery with a few of their own products. But they actually came here because they approached us in the early stages that how can we create a net zero distillery? So within an hour or two, we decided the best thing they could start is by actually living here. And so what we've done is they're pretty well powered by wood chip steam boilers and with solar. But they've managed to reduce their absolute emissions down considerably, down to about 96 tons was their net footprint.
Wow.
And what we've done, which is very good, it's quite a small business, but what we're doing is we're planning a new heritage apple orchard, where they're going to plant trees, so plant about 1,000 trees. And these will produce fruit in a few years' time, granted, for use within their distillery. So they've actually managed to remove all of the carbon on site.
That's amazing. And it presumably also means your bar never runs dry.
So, sorry, repeat that?
Presumably it means your bar doesn't run dry at home.
It never runs dry, yeah.
Yeah. Just as a final question, what sort of innovations have you seen coming up? Can you see any trends? What's exciting you about the future of this space?
I think what's exciting is there are a number of things which are really exciting. I think we're looking really closely at the use of biochar within vineyards. So there's a lot of work happened in Southern Europe using biochar in vineyards. Really, the main aim there was to mitigate against drought, and we found that using biochar can actually reduce the effect of drought by double-digit percentage. So useful, but really biochar is also a very good soil amendment. It's a way to use. We're working with one client who's likely to start growing high biomass crops, to suck carbon out of the atmosphere and then convert it into biochar and then apply it to their vineyard. Techniques like that are really exciting because biochar also has the sort of a catalyst effect on soil biology as well, which in turn draws more carbon. So we get this beautiful self-fulfilling circular carbon removal system.
I love that as well, because biochar is kind of ancient and modern at the same time. It sort of harks back to some really old techniques. And for the sake of the audience, now I'm going to try very briefly to explain what biochar is, but you can correct me because I may be wrong. Effectively, it's a kind of it's a natural material that has been burnt in the absence of oxygen, and therefore it takes on carbon. So when you put it onto the soil, it effectively maximizes your carbon potential in the soil. And where you've used biochar, it massively increases that ability. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes. Effectively,
Okay.
you're cooking biomass in the absence of oxygen, turns it into a form of carbon that can't be broken down into CO2 again.
Amazing. Thank you so much. What's most exciting you? What do you think that what do you think that is going to be the next big thing, if other than biochar? What do you think is gonna energize you? Because you're obviously you're an innovator. You're someone who loves to kind of see the next big thing. What's next? What's exciting you most about your next steps?
Oh gosh, I should have thought about this before. before. What's next? I guess on it's simply what we see is, and I get really excited about compost. Okay, so
That's great.
I'm seeing a lot of vineyards who are effectively giving away their mark. So they've squished it. I got told off the other day for talking about squishing grapes. They press their grapes, and then quite often the mark that comes out the end of the press is sent off to an AD plant or just thrown in a corner of a field. Well, actually, I went to a vineyard the other day, and I couldn't help myself. I got my hands into the composted mark that had been there for quite a few years. Now they'd literally been tipping it up in a row for a long time, and this stuff was just, it smelt beautiful, it looked beautiful, and that should be being reapplied as a composting material back to the soil, because again, that is manna from heaven for soil organisms. So it might not be that innovative, but it's what excites me, Anne.
Well, that's the most important thing. Thank you so much. That's actually been so enlightening. And if you'd like to hear more from Doug and more from Beyond Zero, come to Sustainability and Drinks on the 15th of October and see what they can do for your business. Thank you.